This is chapter 5. In the low ceilinged canteen, deep underground, the lunch queue jerked slowly forward. The room was already full and deafeningly noisy. From the grill at the counter, the steam of stew came pouring forth. From a sour or from with a sour metallic smell which did not quite overcome the fumes of victory gin. On the far side of the room, there was a small bar, a mere hole in the wall, where gin could be bought at 10 cents the large nip. A large nip. Must be like a large cup or some shit.
Is that like a thipple?
A large thipple? God. Just the man I was looking for, said a voice at Winston's back. He turned around. It was his friend, Syme, who worked in the research department. Perhaps friend was not exactly the right word. You did not have friends nowadays. You had comrades. But there were some comrades whose society was pleasanter than that of others. Syme was a philologist, a specialist in newspeak. Indeed, he was one of the enormous team of experts now engaged in compiling the 11th edition of Newspeak Dictionary. He was a tiny creature, smaller than Winston, with dark hair and large, protuberant eyes. So he had eyes like popping out of his damn head.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I got an unpleasant description of
Yeah. Yeah. Like a fucking rude one.
Mm-hmm.
At once, mournful and derisive, which seemed to search your face closely while he was speaking to you. I wanted to ask you whether you got any razor blades, he said. Not one, said Winston, with a sort of guilty haste. I've tried all over the place. They don't exist any longer. Everyone kept asking you for razor blades. Actually, he had 2 unused ones, which he was hoarding up. There had been a famine of them for several months past. At any given moment, there was some necessary article which the party shops were unable to supply. Sometimes it was buttons, sometimes it was darning tool or wool, sometimes it was shoelaces. At the present, it was razor blades. You could only get hold of them, if at all, by scrounging more or less furtively on the free market. I've been using the same blade for 6 weeks, he added untruthfully. What a lying sack of shit.
Well, yeah, but then they're gonna wonder, how did he get 2 extra?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you going to places you shouldn't be going?
Well, and at the end of the day, he's just not being honest, and he's supposed to be completely forthcoming and honest, and, you know.
Rules for thee, but not for me.
Yep. I should put on here to 1 second, guys. question. That's not really a question, but more of a reminder. Over here. Bam. What a boom. Anyways. The Q gave another jerk forward. As they halted, he turned and faced Syme again. Each of them took a greasy metal tray from a pile at the edge of the counter. Did you go see the prisoners hanged yesterday? Said Syme. I was working, said Winston indifferently. I shall see it on the flicks, I suppose. A very inadequate substitute, said Syme. His mocking eyes roved over Winston's face. I know you. The eyes seemed to say, I see right through you. I know very well why you didn't go to the prisoners hanged, or to see those prisoners hanged. In an intellectual way, Syme was venomously orthodox. He would talk with a disagreeable, gloating satisfaction of helicopter raids on enemy villages, the trial and confusion of thought criminals, the execution in the cellars of the Ministry of Love. Talking to him was largely a matter of getting him away from such subjects and entangling him, if possible, in technicalities of newspeak, on which he was authoritative and interesting. Winston turned his head a little aside to avoid the scrutiny of the large, dark eyes. It was a good hanging, said Syme reminiscently. I think it spoils it when they tie their feet together. I like to see them kicking. And above all, at the end, the tongue sticking right out in blue, a quite bright blue, that's the detail that appeals to me. Next, please, yelled the white apron prole with a ladle. Winston and Syme pushed their trays beneath the grill. Onto each was dumped swiftly the regulation lunch. Metal panic of pinkish gray stew, a hunk of bread, a cube of cheese, a mug of milkless Victory coffee, and one saccharine tablet. That's some shit.
Yeah. No, it's so good though. We should want this.
Well, the people like nowadays fighting for this dumb shit, which I guess not fighting for it or whatever, but they just want a nutrition tablet. They don't even want the slop. Like, just give me a tablet I can pop in my mouth and you know.
Oh, like those people who want adult chow.
Mm-hmm.
Grow up. Learn to cook.
Yep.
Oh, they piss me off so bad.
Well, it's laziness.
I'm like, they have that. You know what it's called? Cereal.
Right.
Grow up.
Just eat dog food.
Well, you're damn near there.
Yeah, basically. There's a table over there, under that telescreen, said Syme. Let's pick up a gin on the way. Wait, wasn't this lunch? They're just like, yeah, that's fine. You guys aren't driving.
Oh, yeah.
The gin was served out to them in handleless China mugs. They threaded their way across the crowded room and unpacked their trays onto the metal-topped table, on one corner of which someone had left a pool of stew, a filthy liquid mess that had the appearance of vomit. Winston took up his mug of gin, paused for an instant to collect his nerve, and gulped the oily-tasting stuff down. When he had winked the tears out of his eyes, he suddenly discovered that he was hungry. He began swallowing spoonfuls of stew, which, among its general sloppiness, had cubes of spongy, pinkish stuff, which was probably a preparation of meat. Neither of them spoke again till they had emptied their pannikins from the table at Winston's left. A little behind his back, someone was talking rapidly and continuously, a harsh gabble almost like the quacking of a duck, which pierced the general uproar of the room. "How is the dictionary getting on?" said Winston, raising his voice to overcome the noise. "Slowly," said Syme. I'm on adjectives. It's fascinating." He had brightened up immediately at the mention of newspeak. He pushed his pannikin to the side, took up his hunk of bread in one delicate hand and his cheese in the other, and leaned across the table so as to be able to speak without shouting. "The 11th edition is the definitive edition," he said. "We're getting the language into its final shape. The shape it's going to have when nobody speaks anything else. When we've finished with it, people like you will have to learn it all over again. You think, I dare say, that our chief job is inventing new words, but not a bit of it. We're destroying words, scores of them, hundreds of them. Every day we're cutting the language down to the bone. 11th edition won't contain a single word that will become obsolete before the year 2050. Well then. He bit hungrily into his bread and swallowed a couple mouthfuls. Then continued speaking with a sort of pedant's passion. His thin, dark face had become animated. His eyes had lost their mocking expression and grown almost dreamy. "It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. Of course, the great wastage is in the verbs and adjectives, but there are hundreds of nouns that can be got rid of as well. It isn't only the synonyms, there are also antonyms, after all. What justification is there for a word which is simply the opposite of some other words? A word contains its opposite in itself. Take good, for instance. If you have a word like good, what need is there for a word like bad? Ungood will do just as well. Better, because it's an exact opposite, which the other is not. Or again, if you want a stronger version of good, that sense is having a whole string of vague, useless words like excellent, splendid, all the all the rest of them. Plus good covers the meaning, or double plus good if you want something stronger still. That's like the stupidest shit I've ever heard. Double plus good.
Well, yeah, but think about like the way people talk on social media. Because it's quicker and easier.
Which is true. Very true.
You know.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Mm.
Of course, we use those forms already, but in the final version of Newspeak, there will be nothing else. In the end, the whole nation of goodness and badness will be covered by only 6 words. In reality, only 1 word. Don't you see that, Winston? It was BB's idea originally, of course, he added as an afterthought. A sort of vapid eagerness flitted across Winston's face at the mention of Big Brother. Nevertheless, I immediately detected a certain lack of enthusiasm. You haven't a real appreciation of newspeak, Winston, he said almost sadly. Even when you write it, you're still thinking in old speak. Ah, I've read some of those pieces that you write in Times occasionally. They're good enough, but they're translations. In your heart, you'd prefer to stick to old speak, with all its vagueness and uselessness shades of meaning. You don't grasp the beauty of destruction of words. Do you know that Newspeak is the only language in the world whose vocabulary gets smaller every year? Winston, did you know that, of course, or Winston, did you know that? Of course, he smiled sympathetically. He hoped not, trusting himself to speak. Syme bit off another fragment of the dark colored bread, chewed it briefly, and went on. Don't you see the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. Every concept that will ever be needed will be expressed by exactly one word, and with its meaning rigidly defined and all its subsidiary meanings rubbed out and forgotten. Already in the 11th edition, we're not far from that point, but the process will still be continuing long after you and I are dead. Every year, every year, fewer and fewer words, and the range of consciousness always a little smaller. Even now, of course, there's no reason or excuse for committing thought crime. It's merely a question of self discipline, reality control. But in the end, there won't be any need for even that. The revolution will complete the when the language is perfect. Newspeak is Ingsoc, and Ingsoc is Newspeak, he added, with a sort of mystical satisfaction. Has it occurred? Has it occurred to you, Winston, that by the year 2050, at the very latest, not a single human being will be alive who could understand such a conversation as we are having now? Except, began Winston doubtfully, and then stopped. It had been on the tip of his tongue to say, except the proles, but he checked himself, not feeling fully certain that this remark was not in some way unorthodox. Syme, however, had divined what he was about to say. The proles are not human beings, he said carelessly. Pop my wrist real quick. Nice.
Sounds like a good one.
Yeah, like holding a book like this just makes me need to pop my wrist for some reason.
That's why they make page holders.
Page holders along
with book holders. Like they keep it held open.
What a fucking nerd.
Some fucking bitch.
The first book that I've held in so long. So I'm so damn smart.
Good.
Anyways, carrying on. He says, the proles are not human beings, he said carelessly. By 2050, earlier probably, all real knowledge of Old Speak will have disappeared. The whole literature of the past will have been destroyed. Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Byron, they'll exist only in Newspeak versions, not merely changed into something different, but actually changed into something contradictory of what they used to be. Even the literature of the party will change, even the slogans will change. How could you have a slogan like freedom is slavery when the concept of freedom has been abolished? The thought or the whole climate of thought will be different. In fact, there will be no thought as we understand it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness. One of these days, thought Winston, will sudden deep or with sudden deep conviction, Syme will be vaporized. He is too intelligent. He sees too clearly and speaks too plainly. The party does not like such people. One day he will disappear. It is written on his face. Winston had finished his bread and cheese. He turned a little sideways in his chair to drink his mug of coffee. At the end, or at the table on his left, the man with the strident voice, was still talking remorselessly away. A young woman who was perhaps his secretary, who was sitting with her back to Winston, was listening to him and seemed to be eagerly agreeing with everything that he said. From time to time, Winston caught such remarks as, "I think you're so right. I do so agree with you," uttered in a youthful and rather silly feminine voice. But the other voice never stopped for an instant. Even when the girl was speaking, um, Winston knew the man by sight. Though he knew no more about him than that he held some important post in the fiction department, he was a man of about 30 with a muscular throat and a large, mobile mouth. His head was thrown back a little, and because of the angle at which he was sitting, his spectacles caught the light and presented to Winston two blank discs instead of eyes. What was slightly horrible was that from the stream of sound that poured out of his mouth, it was almost impossible to distinguish a single word. Just once, Winston caught a phrase, complete and final elimination of Goldsteinism, jerked out very rapidly and, as it seemed, all in one place, like a line of typecast solid. For the rest, it was just noise, a quack, quack, quacking. And yet, though you could not actually hear what the man was saying, you could not be in any doubts about its general nature. He might be denouncing Goldstein and denouncing sterner measures against the thought criminals and saboteurs. He might be fulminating against the atrocities of the Eurasian army. He might be praising Big Brother or the heroes of the Malabar front. It made no difference. Whatever it was, you could be certain that every word of it was pure orthodoxy, pure ingsoc. As he watched the eyeless face with the jaw movement rapidly up and down, Winston had a curious feeling that this was not a real human being, but some kind of dummy. It was not the man's brain that was speaking out, it was his larynx. His larynx. The stuff that was coming out of him consisted of words, but it was not speech in the true sense. It was noise uttered in unconsciousness, like the quacking of a duck. Syme had fallen silent for a moment, and with the handle of his spoon, his tracing patterns in the puddle of stew, the voices from the other table quacked rapidly on, easily audible in spite of the surrounding din. There is a word in Newspeak, said Syme. I don't know whether you know it. Duck speak. To quack like a duck. It is one of those interesting words that have two contradictory meanings. Applied to an opponent, it is abuse. Applied to someone you agree with, it is praise. Unquestionably, Syme will be vaporized. Winston thought again. He thought it with a kind of sadness, although well knowing that Syme despised him and slightly disliked him, and was fully capable of denouncing him as a thought criminal if he saw any reason for doing so. There was something subtly wrong with Syme. There was something that he lacked: discretion, aloofness, a sort of saving stupidity. You could not say that he was unorthodox. He believed in the principles of Ingsoc. He venerated Big Brother. He rejoiced over victories. He hated heretics, not merely with sincerity, but with a sort of restless zeal and up to dateness of information, uh, which the ordinary party members did not approach. Yet a faint air of disreputability always clung to him. He said things that would have been better unsaid. He read too many books. He frequented the Chestnut Tree Cafe, haunt of painters and musicians. There was no law, not even an unwritten law, against frequenting the Chestnut Tree Cafe, yet the place was somehow ill omened. The old, discredited leaders of the party had been used to gather there before they were finally purged. Goldstein himself, uh, it was said, was sometimes been or had sometimes been seen there years and decades ago. Syme's fate was not difficult to foresee, and yet it was a fact that if Syme grasped even for 3 seconds the nature of his Winston's secret opinions, he would betray him instantly to the thought police. So would anyone else for that matter, but Syme, more than most, zeal was not enough. Orthodoxy was unconsciousness. Syme looked up. Here comes Parsons, he said. Something in the tone of his voice seemed to add that bloody fool Parsons. Winston's fellow tenant at Victory Mansions was in fact threading his way across the room. A tubby, middle-sized man with fair hair and a frog-like face. At 35, he was already putting on rolls of fat at neck and waistline, but his movements were brisk and boyish. His whole appearance was that of a little boy grown large, so much so that although he was wearing the regulation overalls, it was almost impossible not to think of him as being dressed in blue shorts, gray shirt, and the red neckerchief of the spies. In visualizing him, one saw always a picture of dimpled knees and sleeves rolled up back from pudgy forearms. Pudgy forearms. Well
At
then.
least he's not a gooner, I guess.
What if that's why?
How are you gonna have pudgy forearms goonin'?
I don't know.
Math ain't mathin'.
That which is true. Let's see here. I want to pause my mic for a half a second. Parsons did, indeed, invariably revert to shorts when a ceremony or when a community hike or any other activities that or physical activity gave him an excuse for doing so. He greeted them both with a cherry hello, 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 and sat down at the table, giving off an intense smell of sweat. Beads of moisture rolled, or beads of moisture stood out all over his pink face. His power of sweating, his powers of sweating were extraordinary. Uh, at the community center, you could always tell when he had been playing table tennis by the dampness of the bat handle. Yuck.
Ew.
Yeah. Syme had produced a strip of paper on which there was a long column of words and was studying it with an ink pencil between his fingers. Look at him working away in the lunch hour, said Parsons, nudging Winston. Keenness, eh? Er, Keenness, huh? What's that you got there, old boy? Something a bit too brainy for me. I expect, Smith, old boy. I'll tell you why I'm chasing you. It's that sub you forgot to give me. Which sub is that? Said Winston, automatically feeling for money. About a quarter of one's salary had to be earmarked for voluntary subscriptions, which were so numerous that it was difficult to keep track of them. For Hate Week, you know, the House by House Fund. I'm going treasure for our block. We're making an all out effort going to put on a tremendous show, I'll tell you. It won't be my fault if Old Victory Mansions doesn't have the biggest outfit of flags in the whole street. $2 you promised me. Winston found and handed over two creased and filthy notes which Parsons entered in a small notebook. In the neat handwriting of the illustrate, by the way, old boys, he said, I hear that little beggar of mine let fly at you with his catapult yesterday. What? I hear that little beggar of mine let fly at you with his catapult yesterday. God. I gave him a good dressing down for it. In fact, I told him I'd take the catapult away if he does it again. I think he was a little upset at not knowing or at not going to the execution, said Winston. Oh, I see what he's saying. Okay. I hear that little beggar of mine let fly at you with the catapult. He's just talking about him shooting his kid, shooting him with the catapult. If they'd speak plain fucking English, you know.
Then you wouldn't get the point.
Oh yeah, then I'd understand it too easily, and I wouldn't have to sit here talking about it. I'm telling you, this shit will rot your brains.
I don't think you know.
Oh well, what I mean to say. Wait. Oh well, what I mean to say shows the right spirit, doesn't it? Mischievous little beggars they are, both of them. But talk about neat keenness. All they think about is the spies and the war, of course. Do you know what that little girl of mine did last Saturday when her troop was on a hike out Berkhampstead way? She got two other girls to go with her, slipped off from the hike, and spent the whole afternoon following a strange man. They kept on his tail for 2 hours right through the woods, and then when they got into the Amersham, handed him over to the patrols. What did they do for that? Said Winston, somewhat taken aback. Parsons went on triumphantly. My kid made sure he was some kind of enemy agent. Might have been dropped by parachute, for instance. But here's the point, old boy. What do you think put her on to him in the first place? She spotted he was wearing a funny kind of shoes. Said she'd never seen anyone wearing shoes like that before. So the chances were he was a foreigner. Pretty smart for a nipper of 7, huh? What happened to the man? Said Winston. That I couldn't say, of course. But I wouldn't be altogether surprised if Parsons made the motion of aiming a rifle and clicked his tongue out for the explosion. Good, said Syme abstractedly without looking up from a strip of paper. Of course we can't afford to take chances, agreed Winston. Of course we can't afford to take chances, agreed Winston dutifully. Uh, what I mean to say, there is a war on, said Parsons. Hmm. As though in confirmation of this, a trumpet called floating or a trumpet call floated from the telescreen just above their heads. However, it was not the proclamation of military victory this time, but merely an announcement of the Ministry of Plenty. Comrades, cried an eager youthful voice, attention, comrades, we have glorious news for you. We have won the battle for production. Returns now completed the output of all classes of consumption goods show that the standard of living has risen by no less than 20% over the past year. All over Oceania this morning, there were irrepressible, spontaneous demonstrations when workers marched out of factories and in offices and paraded through the streets with banners voicing their gratitude to Big Brother for the new happy life which his wise leadership had bestowed upon us. Here are some of the completed figures, foodstuffs. Mm-mm. Phone's starting to die. Down to like 19%. Perfect. What a boom. Anyways, where are we at? The phase, our new happy life, recurred several times. It had been a favorite of late. It had been a favorite of late with the Ministry of Plenty. Parsons, his attention caught by the trumpet call, sat listening with a sort of gaping solemnity, whatever.
Solemnity, I think.
Yeah, I just, it is such a stupid word. A sort of edified boredom. He could not follow the figures, but he was aware that they were in some way a cause for satisfaction. He had lugged out a huge and filthy pipe which was already half full of charred tobacco. With the tobacco ration at 100 grams a week, it was seldom possible to fill a pipe up to the top. Winston was smoking a Victory cigarette, which he held carefully horizontal. The new ration did not start till tomorrow, and he had only 4 cigarettes left. For the moment, he had shut his ears to the motor noises and was listening to the stuff that steamed out of the telescreen. It appeared that there had even been demonstrations to thank Big Brother for raising the chocolate ration to 20 grams a week. And only yesterday, he reflected, it had been announced that the ration was to be reduced to 20 grams a week. Was it possible that they could swallow that after only 2 or 24 hours? Yes, they swallowed it. Parsons swallowed it easily, with the stupidity of an animal. The glass, or the eyeless creature at the other table swallowed it up fanatically, or fanatically, passionately, with a furious desire to track down, denounce, and vaporize anyone who suggested that last week the ration had been 30 grams. Syme 2, in some more complex way, involving doublethink, same swallowed it. He was then alone in the possession of a memory. The fabulous statistics continued to pour out of the telescreen. As compared with last year, there was more food, more clothes, more houses, more furniture, more cooking pots, more fuel, more ships, more helicopters, more books, more babies, more of everything except disease, crime, and insanity. Year by year, and minute by minute, everybody and everything was whizzing rapidly upwards. As Syme had done earlier, Winston had taken up his spoon and was dabbling in the pale colored gravy that dribbled across the table. Drawing a long streak of it into a pattern. He mediated resentfully on the physical texture of life. He had it always been like this? Had food always tasted like this? He looked around and the canteen, a low-ceilinged, crowded room, its walls grimly from the contact of innumerable bodies, battered metal tables and chairs placed so close together that you sat with elbows touching, bent spoons, dented trays, coarse white mugs, all surfaces greasy, grime in every crack, and sourish. Composite smell and bad gin, bad coffee, and metallic stew and dirty clothes. Always in your stomach, in your skin, there was some sort of protest, a feeling that you had been cheated of something that you had a right to. It was true that he had no memory of anything greatly different in any time. In any time that he could accurately remember, there had never been anything or been quite enough to eat. Or one had never had socks or underclothes that were not full of holes. Furniture had always been battered and rickety, rooms underheated, tube trains crowded, houses falling to pieces, bread dark colored, tea a rarity, coffee filthy tasting, cigarettes insufficient, nothing cheap and plentiful except synthetic gin. And though, of course, it grew worse as one's body aged, was not a sign that this was not the natural order of things. If one's heart sickened at the discomfort and dirt and scarcity, the interminable winters, the stickness of one's socks, the lifts that never worked, the cold water, the gritty soap, the cigarettes that came to pieces, the food with strange evil taste, Why should one feel to be intolerable unless one had some kind of ancestral memory that things had been once been different? um, he looked round the canteen again. Nearly everyone was ugly and would still have been ugly even if dressed otherwise than the uniform blue overalls. On the far side of the room, sitting at a table alone, a small, curiously beetle like man was drinking a cup of coffee, his little eyes darting suspicious glances from side to side. How easy it was, thought Winston, if you did not look about you, to believe that the physical type set up by the party as an ideal. Tall, muscular youth and deep bosomed maidens. Damn, blonde haired, vital, sunburnt, carefree, existed and even predominated. Uh, Actually, so far as he could judge, the majority of people in Airstrip 1 were small, dark, and ill favored. It was curious how that beetle like type proliferated in the ministries. Little dumpy men growing stout very early in life with short legs, swift scuttling movements, and fat, inscrutable faces with small eyes. It was the very type that seemed to flourish under the dominion of the party. Um, 1 minute. The announcement from the Ministry of Plenty ended on another trumpet call and gave way to tinny music, or to tinny music. Parsons stirred to vague enthusiasm by the bombardment of figures took his pipe out of his mouth. The Ministry of Plenty certainly done a good job this year, he said with a knowing shake of his head. By the way, Smith, old boy, I suppose you haven't got any razor blades, do you? Can let me have. I suppose you don't have any razor blades you can let me have. Not one, said Winston. I've been using the same blade for 6 weeks myself. Oh, well, just thought I'd ask you, old boy. Sorry, said Winston. The quacking voice from the next table temporarily silenced during the ministry's announcement had started up again, as loud as ever. For some reason, Winston suddenly found himself thinking of Miss Parsons, with her wispy hair and dust in the creases of her face. Within 2 years, those children would be denouncing her to the thought police. Miss Parsons would be vaporized. Syme would be vaporized. Winston would be vaporized. O'Brien would be vaporized. Parsons, on the other hand, would never be vaporized. The eyeless creature with quacking voice would never be vaporized. The little beetle-like men who scuttled so nimbly through the labyrinthine corridors of the ministries, they too would never never be vaporized. And the girl with the dark hair, the girl from the fiction department, she would never be vaporized either. It seemed to him that he knew instinctively who would survive and who would perish. Though just what it was that made for survival, it was not easy to say. At the moment he dragged At this moment he dragged out of his reverie with a violent jerk. The girl next to the table had turned partly around and was looking at him. It was the girl with the dark hair. She was looking at him in a sidelong way, but with curious intensity. The instant that she caught his eye, she looked away again. Um, the sweat started on Winston's backbone, or started on Winston's backbone. A horrible pang of terror went through him. It was gone almost at once, but it left a sort of nagging uneasiness behind. Why was she watching him? Why did she keep following him about? Unfortunately, he could not remember whether she had already been at the table when he arrived or had come there afterwards, but yesterday, at any rate, during the 2 minutes, hey, she had sat immediately behind him when there was no apparent need to. Quite likely her real object had been to listen to him and make sure whether he was speaking loudly enough. His earlier thoughts returned to him. probably probably she was not actually a member of the thought police, but she was, but then it was precisely the amateur spy who was the greatest danger of all. He did not know how long she had been looking at him, but perhaps for as much as 5 minutes. As and it was possible that his features had not been perfectly under control. It was terribly dangerous to let your thoughts wander when you were in any public place or within range of a telescreen. The smallest thing. Ooh, it's midnight here. Sorry, guys. I'm about done with chapter 5 here. Um, Carrying on. The smallest thing you could give away, a nervous tick, an unconscious look of anxiety, a habit of muttering to yourself. Anything that carried uh, with it the suggestion of abnormality, of having something to hide. In any case, to wear an improper expression on your face, to look incredulous when a victory was announced, for example, was itself a punishable offense. There was even a word for it in newspeak, face crime, it was called. The girl had turned her back on him again. Perhaps, after all, she was not really following him about. Perhaps it was a coincidence that she had sat so close to him 2 days running. His cigarette had gone out, and he laid it carefully on the edge of the table. He would finish smoking it after work. Um, if he could keep the tobacco in it. Quite likely the person at the table was a spy of the thought police, and quite likely he would be in the cellar of the Ministry of Love within 3 days. But a cigarette and must not be wasted. Syme had folded up his strip of paper and stowed it away in his pocket. Parson had begun talking again. Did I ever tell you, old boy, he said, chuckling around the stem of his pipe, about the time when those two nippers of mine set fire to the old market woman's skirt because they saw her wrapping up sausage in a poster of BB, sneaked up behind her and set fire to it with a box of matches. Burned her quite badly, I believe. Little buggers, huh? But keen as mustard. That's a first-rate training they give them in the spies nowadays, better than in my day even. What did you think the latest thing they've served them out with? Ear trumpets for listening through keyholes? My little girl brought one home the other night. Tried it out on our sitting room door and reckoned she could hear twice as much as with her ear to the hole. Of course, it's only a toy, mind you, still gives them the right idea. At this moment, the telescreen let out a piercing whistle. It was the signal to return to work. All three men sprang to their feet to join the struggle round the lifts, and the remaining tobacco fell out of Winston's cigarette. And that's the end of this chapter. That was the end of chapter 5. So, if you guys would like to follow for chapter 6 and 7 and to finish the end of this book with me and my wife, then the best option would definitely be to subscribe. I'm not going to be reading any more of this. It's like past 1 o'clock in the morning here. It's like almost 2 o'clock in the morning here. I'm tired and I'm ready for bed. But if you're here, thanks for watching.